Hello again, I'm Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, therify.net. It is October and cooling off here, and 2021, and we're here to talk about something very important today. The title of today's conversation is The Centripetal Fractal Electric Cause of Gravity, hint, why objects fall to the ground, which is the required key to life force in a seed or body, and how consciousness and vision form inside your body, and the key to zero point and vacuum energy. You know, I have been thinking a lot lately about how difficult it must be if you're a physics professor and your 6-year-old asks you why objects fall to the ground, and you have to be embarrassed and admit you don't really have a clue. And you realize that's probably the most important question in all of physics. And in fact, it was Maurice Cottrell, I think, once said that the physics community is a little bit arrogant given the fact that they don't know why objects fall to the ground, and therefore don't know what life force is or what consciousness is. So indeed, if in physics you don't know why anything is centripetal, then you could never know the cause of gravity, the cause of life, the cause of consciousness, and the cause of zero point or vacuum energy. And so that's a problem we are here to fix today in both powerful physics terms and in simple enough terms that my 10th grade geometry class could enjoy this conversation. So again, the main web links for this conversation are fractalfield.com slash vacuum energy and slash conjugate gravity. Our other websites, as you know, flameinmind.com, theimploder.com, realheartcoherence.com, therify.net, and the list goes on. So all vacuum coherence technologies ultimately require fractal conjugate charge symmetry to implode the surrounding ether, which is like a superfluid charged media, to the point of neg entropy. And as you know, our YouTube channel, youtube.com/danwinterfractalfield, 1.3 million views, 28,000 followers, and our Facebook is facebook.com/fractalfield. Currently we have about 18,000 following and 5,000 friends. Okay, so the theme of today's conversation, if you knew what is a plasma vortex, and we're about to show very technically what that is in the center of hydrogen and in the center of your brain when you create vision without your eyes. If you know what is a plasma vortex and how it becomes centripetal, hint, fractal conjugation, then you can know what is the physics of implosion, how shamans steer tornadoes, the physics of healing plasma, negentropy in plasma, therify.net. You can know the physics of an elemental or an angel, which is a plasma body. You could know how life force forms in a seed. You could know what survives death. You could know how out-of-body visions and lucid dreaming work. Longitudinal interferometry is the key. You could know how all action at a distance and stargates work. Longitudinal interferometry compresses, implodes, and propagates the longitudinal compressional wave in superluminal faster than light velocities, which are golden ratio exponents of the speed of light, faster than light, and those multiples times the speed of light determine how many dimensions, as it were, how many axial velocities are propagating faster than light, creating that infinite multiply connected topology. That's the physics of stargates. You could learn how hydrogen makes gravity. You could learn how Gaia, Earth's Schumann Field, becomes negentropic, self-organizing. You could learn how a soul forms in imploding DNA, and we have pictures. You could learn how the Nazi bell, the Honibu flew, the imploding mercury vortex. You could learn the principle of zero-point vacuum energy in general. You could learn the physics of consciousness itself. You could learn the physics of ascension. You could learn how body parasites and astral parasites and ET parasites get toasted if you have the implosion of charge named BLISS, which creates the charge radiance and also creates the sorting at center. So again, if you know what is a plasma vortex and how it becomes centripetal, then you can know all of these things. But if you don't know how a plasma vortex, for example, the one at the center of hydrogen, if you don't know how it became centripetal, then you cannot know any of these things. And that's the reason we're here. So it is because Einstein and your physics teacher and Stephen Hawking and NASA could not teach your child why an object falls to the ground is the reason your child doesn't know why anything is centripetal or self-organizing. That's why your child doesn't know how a plasma cloud becomes mindful, like an elemental or an angel. The universe is not, in fact, condemned to entropy. Physics is wrong. There is a path out of entropy chaos, which is called negentropy, and that path is golden ratio exponents times Planck, which is that threshold at which that longitudinal array accepts the charge inertia, which is why planets and stars experience gravity relations erotically, and we're going to talk about that from Gurdjieff. So you can know why the rapture exists. Literally, you do not want to be the left behind during the rapture. Well, the rapture actually is entering the charge distribution efficiency, hey ave heaven, which is the super high phase conjugate dielectric of charge distribution efficiency, the planes of Charon, the Champs-Élysées. This is heaven. It is a fractal field, and it is a longitudinal fractal interferometric array. You could learn why perfect fractal conjugate compressibility is the only cause of gravity and negentropy and defines sustainability. You could learn why negative ion wind, cold plasma, create propulsion and healing. It's proven in hospitals. Negative ion wind is healing. Therify is just a big negative ion wind. What makes a negative ion wind negentropic? What enables a negative ion wind to survive? Well, hint, an aluminum box for a room doesn't cut it. Sorry. You could learn why 4 and 5D next dimension physics and time reversal portals and stargates are in fact only possible when charge rotations superpose by conjugating golden ratio. So we say, well, you might want to fire the scientist who can't teach your child why an object falls to the ground, because then he can't teach your child all of the important things of how charge makes life. And again, this is the picture. This is just a picture of perfect conjugating golden ratio. Maybe if I make this smaller zoom here. So when I made this picture, I didn't know that this was in fact literally a plot of the geometry of hydrogen. But in fact it is. And you see what the golden ratio is doing there, 0.618, 1.618, 2.618. Add any two numbers and you get the following. Or multiply any number by 1.618 and you get the next number. For example, 1.618 squared is 2.618. So by having the solution to both adding and multiplying, which we've known for centuries, you also have the solution to recursive constructive wave interference. And that is new information. And that's what we have the equations to prove, thanks to the Navier-Stokes and the equations we used, which I'm about to show you. So in this paper, we took, there's two published papers we have which prove the background in physics here. The first one is called Compressions, the Hydrogen Atom and Phase Conjugation. And I did this with my partners, William Donovan and Martin Jones. Martin was particularly expert at the mathematics, we want to acknowledge, and Bill was an expert at the high-end electrical engineering. So what we proved, it was my insight that golden ratio exponents, multiples times Planck, produce the hydrogen radii, and I'll show you how I discovered that in a moment. But it was with the help of Martin Jones that we developed the, it's not the Navier-Stokes equation, we used the Navier-Stokes wave equations to prove how vorticity creates gravity at fractalfield.com/propulsion. But in the original paper here, fractal golden ratio phase conjugation, cause of gravity, that's the second paper we published, we used the equations based on generalized wave equations based on perfect adding and multiplying to show that, oh yes, they're called the Klein-Gordon equations. So generalized wave equations allowed us to show that if you set up that golden ratio harmonic series, literally this series right there, if you set up waves in that ratio on a line, golden ratio 1, 1.618, 2.618, if you set up those waves on a line, the Klein-Gordon equations allowed us to generalize and say that that was the maximum possible constructive wave interference if those waves were on a line. Now it turns out if that line of simple golden ratio nodes on a line is the solution to constructive wave interference. Remember, the solution to constructive wave interference is the solution of compression, which is the solution to every single problem that physics pretty much has ever had, from gravity to alchemy to fusion to the evolution of computers, evolution of life. It's all about the solution to compression. Alchemy is absolutely a name for the solution to compression, called alchem, access to the black hole. So solving the problem of perfecting compression is solving almost every problem we got. Well, once we knew that a golden ratio series on a line like this, if you take that line, golden ratio, we later proved, which is what my star mother kit is, goldenmean.info/kit, that the radii of an infinite stellated dodecaecosa, you see depicted here, which is what the star mother kit is, that every single vertex in an infinitely stellated dodecaecosa, every single vertex has an xyz coordinate, which is simply a power series of golden ratio, 0.6181, 1.612. So x, y, and z, the vertex point of all the coordinates, are golden ratio, which proves that if you take the symmetry axes, as it were, 6 and 12, of the dodecaecosa, and you send a line through all the vertex in all directions, the radii on the line that is the 3D model is the same line, 0.618, 1.618, that we just proved is the solution of compression on a line. So if you know that the line, which is the solution of compression, all golden ratio nodes, suddenly is the axial radii, 12 radii going in all directions through the dodeca nodes, through the ecosa nodes, as it were, is the same golden ratio coordinates, then you can say, oh, we took that line, which is perfect compression on a line, and we made that the radii of a dodecaecosa. Then later we proved that that's the structure of hydrogen. So we then had the proof of how hydrogen is a solution to non-destructive compression. Now, how I derived that solution to hydrogen was I took Hayrovska's work, and we have the pictures here later in this slideshow, that Hayrovska had done a large amount of work showing that, in fact, the structure of hydrogen had golden ratio all over it. And Hayrovska had already shown that 3 radii of hydrogen, 3 electron shells, as it were simply golden ratio to each other. So the only thing I added, which was critical, was the distance of golden ratio times Planck predicted the distance to center. That was the new information. And I intuited that this must be implosion tuned to some central black hole where the connectivity was perfect. And indeed, when I showed that you take Planck length, 1.61 times 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, and multiply by integer exponential golden ratio, the 116, 117, 118 power, and you just keep doing that, and you get all important radii, you got super accurately the radii of hydrogen. And, you know, dear physicists, no one except an answer that this could be a coincidence. No, the reason that hydrogen radii are so exquisitely tuned to Planck is because at the Planck threshold, the transverse charge inertia is compressed into longitudinal charge distribution, which is what gravity waves are, and that's where we're going to use some of the Tom Bearden equations later in this presentation. So you're going to see that the nodal array distribution of what enabled hydrogen to make gravity was the fact that down that vortex cone, down this vortex cone, so what I proved is this is the shape of the vortex that make hydrogen. That's what I proved by equation. Now, if we look at what's happening down that perfected vortex cone, called optimized translation of vorticity, which is how you define golden spiral in hydrodynamics, what's being translated in perfect translation of vorticity efficiently is the transverse up and down inertia here on the left versus the longitudinal compressional wave inertia on the right, which becomes gravity waves and life force and the grid array which you inhabit, which is literally the physics of consciousness. That's Hayave, that's the collective unconscious, is that longitudinal interferometric array. And the fact that when you create longitudinal waves coherently, you create lucid dreaming, therify.net, is proof that the array we've been talking about as this collective unconsciousness, the dreaming tracks, the dream spell, is built on that longitudinal compressional array. So in fact, The reason gravity exists is actually simple and elegant. That when charge is imploding down the throat of that perfect vortex, which assembled makes hydrogen, is not only do you have perfected non-destructive or implosive fractal phase conjugate compression of charge, turning that compression in that geometry into acceleration of charge towards center. Remember, as the phase velocities add and multiply recursively, which only golden ratio allows, constructive recursive heterodyning of phase velocities, those phase velocities turn compression into acceleration of charge toward the center, which is named the gravity. In fact, Einstein was right. Acceleration is, there's no experiment which can discriminate acceleration from gravity, because it's the same thing. You know, when you stand in an elevator and you accelerate upward, that is gravity. It's not like gravity, it is gravity. So acceleration of charge is gravity. And once you understand what accelerates the charge toward the center of hydrogen, then you suddenly know the cause of gravity. So remember that the charge that's being compressed accelerated towards center, the reason it can do that is because there's a way out for the charge at center. I mean, Einstein got it right. He said if we could understand infinite non-destructive compression, we would understand gravity in the unified field. He knew that much. What he didn't know was how charge, remember, charge rotation, it's a superfluid. Charge rotates, and you measure the inertia of that rotation, that's named mass, and you measure the period of that rotation, and that's the only definition of time, the period of charge rotation. Charge rotation is the creator and definer of both mass and time. So when that charge is rotating down that vortex constructively, that charge is the compression and rarefaction of the ether, which is a superfluid. You know, electrical amps and voltage are named for fluid dynamics. Amperage is flow rate and voltage is pressure or tension. So it is a fluid. It's not like a fluid. It is a fluid. It's a superfluid. And that charge, when it has a way out at the center, and what gives the charge a way out at the center is the fact that when it reaches right here, the tip of the pine cone, which is named Planck, that dimension, at that critical threshold, there is a defined shareability that's initiated, which tunes it to the rest of the universe. This is the only actual evidence for a Big Bang, is the fact that Planck is shareable. The reason Planck is shareable, because it defines where transverse waves turn into longitudinal waves, which are gravity, and the radio of the wavelength of Planck is what the universe has in common, and that's gravity radio, and that's an introduction to Gurdjieff saying planets and stars experience gravity relations erratically. So gravity exists because there's a way out for charge at the center of the vortex, and that only way out is when they're compressed specifically to Planck, golden ratio to Planck, and there you get golden ratio acceleration through the speed of light. Remember, famous Professor Ravenshaw's, all of his measurements of fast and light velocities average between 1.5 and 1.7 times the speed of light, centering almost beautifully upon 1.618, or golden ratio, times the speed of light. So when we confirm that golden ratio is the dominant velocity measured faster than light, that is the smoking gun that's proof of my theory of gravity here, which is how fractality causes gravity. So this is an introduction to the longitudinal fractal array mechanics of how consciousness expands into bliss. But we're going to do this physics of this first, that inhabiting this array is the centripetal force that's enabled. So once you enable this centripetal force, you enable consciousness, you enable steering tornadoes, you enable centripetal force, you enable negentropy. This is how pyramids work as an immortality machine. This is what gravity waves are made of. We're going to look at the Tom Bearden's equation from gravitobiology. This is how lucid dreaming and the collective unconscious propagate. So this is going to tell us more about what is a black hole. In fact, it's only a black hole if golden ratio times Planck is working, because that's the only way you can implode through center. So to say that that mass is a kind of black hole is merely to say that the gravity causing mass permits acceleration through the speed of light at center because of phase conjugation to Planck. It's a new answer to what a black hole is, quite literally. The chem and alchemy, for example, access to a black hole. It also explains the communication device at the center of toroidal ball lightning, which that communication of that implosion to Planck is the beginning of understanding DNA radio and why ball lightning responds so well to telepathy. We've talked about it many times. So here we're talking about the fractality is key to alchemy, hydrogen, gravity. Zero-point energies always affect gravity. For example, the Joe cell zero-point implosive capacitor concentric metal tubes, that would quit if you drive over a metal railroad track. Do you know why? Because there's no charge to implode when you're over a metal railroad track. Hint, next time you want to have bliss, don't do it over a metal railroad track, etc., etc. So zero-point energy could not be understood until we knew why objects fall to the ground. So this is reviewing what we just said. The vacuum plenum is only free if charge circulation is enabled, and only a fractal conjugate array enables charge circulation to be efficient, and therefore gravity to be efficient and negentropic. So later when we see the pictures from New Scientist magazine showing that the universe arrangement of masses is dodeca and fractal, now for the first time we know why. And so we're here talking about charge rotation stored as a definer of mass and time. Space-time is not bent by gravity. No, no. What happens is that the time is a name for the rate of rotation of charge. And as you accelerate the torus, which contained the charge rotating, some of that acceleration is translated in inertia to accelerated spin rate. An accelerated spin rate of charge is the experience of time speeding up and slowing down. So once after you understand that time is merely a name for rate of charge rotation, then it all makes sense, and you don't need to use stupid terms like bending space-time. That's not even helpful. So we're saying electricity is simply a superfluid, and when charge flows towards center, centripetally, electronegativity and gravity. So now that have we explained the cause of all centripetal forces, we've explained the origin of electronegativity in general. And so this non-destructive compression, acceleration of charge is the gravity, so to speak. So golden ratio, phase conjugation of phases perfected, is fractality perfected, recursion perfected, embedding perfected, entanglement perfected. You know, when your local scientist says, well, we know action and resistance is caused by entanglement, what they forget to tell you that entanglement perfected is embedding perfected, which is the problem golden ratio phase conjugation solves. So the reason entanglement perfected causes action and distance is because the phase conjugation named entanglement creates longitudinal interferometry, which is the physics of action at a distance and the real physics of the Einstein-Rosen bridge. Self-similarity perfected, compression perfected, implosion perfected, entanglement perfected, phase conjugation, nesting perfected, vacuum coherence perfected. So this fractal array is the solution to all the fun stuff. So when, for example, Ingo Swann heated that thermistor with his mind at a distance, we now know the longitudinal interferometry that allowed him to do that action at a distance was golden ratio cascade in his brain waves. So sacred space, fertility perfected, is merely the longitudinal coherent interferometry. That's what sacred space is. And longitudinal scalar EMF is the path to perfect distribution and literally the path to immortality. It is embedding in that array that allows you to enter the collective unconscious at death. This is called the perfect flame, as in flameinmind.com, as in the golden ratio cascade of brain harmonics that allows you to see without your eyes and implode and have charge radiance and bliss. And this is why it's called cold plasma, because the best way to have plasma cold without heat is this flame that does not consume. And this is the introduction of fusion. And this is another graphic which is helpful in this regard. You see in this top-down view of hydrogen and DNA, Earth grid and zodiac, and the geometry of arrangement of masses in the universe. This is the top-down view here. Also the top-down view of every living protein. And you see, as the waves add and multiply recursively their wavelength, they add and multiply their phase velocities, and the phase velocities, by adding and multiplying the golden ratio, enable acceleration to be generated from compression only in this geometry. And that acceleration of charge towards center is what we're talking about. And so this is the intelligence it takes to figure out the golden ratios is the solution to constructive wave interference is right up there with the smarts it takes to know that the correct shape to make a wheel is a circle. You know, we've been admiring golden ratio as the definition of beauty, but nobody ever thought in physics the reason it's called beautiful is because it enables compression. And so we have many 3D pictures of this, which we've been sharing for years. So efficient plasma containment, cold fusion, is this longitudinal interferometry. And when lasers approach from 4 directions, they do this. They phase conjugate these light cones. And in the media called a phase conjugate dielectric, the barium strontium titanate, the phase conjugate mirror substance, it enables the vortex charge cones to distribute charge efficiently and therefore get that conjugate interferometry at atomic distances, which is the reason phase conjugate mirrors work. Very important, not only to learn how phase conjugate mirrors make time reversal and negentropy, but to understand how scrying stones enable ancestor communications. Because the same access to that longitudinal interferometry is the radio to ancestor memory, how John Dee's obsidian mirror and the Olmec obsidian mirror worked, was they are phase conjugate mirrors, and that's the physics of scrying because that's access to that longitudinal array, which is the physics of clairvoyance. So we've seen this picture already. We saw this picture. How does phase conjugate compression cause gravity? By enabling this constructive interference down the light cone. And you see, we talk about this being the physics of ascension. It's really quite simple, that as the number of axes of rotating charge superpose around a cube by golden ratio, that becomes dodeca, and then the next one's dodeca, and each one, there's superposed harmonic inclusive, optimized by golden ratio, enables you to ascend because that is not just the next superposed axis of charge spin symmetry, the only definition of the next dimension, but that's then access to the longitudinal array. So when you get very still in that array and you realize you're steering a bigger and bigger tornado, the stillness of that bigger and bigger tornado is the bigger and bigger array you're enabled by the increasing number of golden ratio harmonics times the speed of light because the superposed axis is symmetry, which increases density. That's why it's called the next axis, the next density. So literally, the ability to be in the next dimension starts with stillness in this dimension. And when you feel something crackle at a distance and you realize it's inside your body, you realize you're inhabiting the array. And the array is what that being, the next dimensional being, is about. You're steering larger and larger vortex tornadoes of charge, eventually angel bodies, and what you used to call God. Now, our whole series on the physics of Kundalini is based on exactly this harmonic science, and the new professional films are at goldenmean.info/Kundalini, the true harmonic physics of bliss. So this is what I did with my equation then. I took Planck, length or time, and used integer exponents of golden ratio and predicted 3 exact radii of hydrogen, the wavelength 1.93 angstrom of ATP, the most important molecule in the body. The exact frequencies and wavelengths of the only 2 harmonic peaks that enable photosynthesis, 427 and 691 nanometers, are exactly golden ratio times Planck. That is a smoking gun that phase conjugation to Planck is the cause of photosynthesis and why it's negentropic. It's also the physics of the reason rainbows exist. And so here also you see that the British foot is exactly golden ratio times Planck, and you'll see our equation that the British foot then embeds in almost every other definition of sacred dimension in history, from the cubit to the Roman pace, the megalithic yard. They're all related to the British foot. You know, John Michel enabled. The point is that golden ratio times Planck defines sacred dimensioning because it defines enabled compression, which defines sacred space. So once you know the definition of sacred dimensioning begins with golden ratio times Planck, you can know the definition of sacred space, which enabling charge compression to create fertility. Golden ratio times Planck equals the Schumann harmonics and the brainwave harmonics of bliss, and we have charts of that. It equals the most important frequency in the blood called the Mayer wave, 0.1 hertz, which is also the most important frequency of the breath for yoga. That 0.1 hertz, 10-second breath is predicted out path out of negentropy, a path into negentropy. It predicts the Venus year, Earth year, galactic year, precessional year. So you see that this is a path out of chaos. Notice that when I think Elizabeth Rauscher did the math for Nassim here, who published this very useful parallel, he showed the BB, the Big Bang, the atomic unit, the local galaxy, and the large galaxy, and the universe. And if you look at the relationship between these frequencies versus wavelength, you get golden ratio, golden ratio, golden ratio, golden ratio. And he called this the scaling law for all organized matter, and says usefully that, you know, everything is a black hole. Well, yes, but the reason everything is a black hole is what I discovered. So this is just another summary of what we just talked about. Here is this Mayer wave here. The LF and HF component of heart rate variability, the two most important frequencies of the heart, are golden ratio times Planck. So the heart is on its way out of negentropy because, and this is just another picture of our first published paper, Compressions of Hydrogen Atoms Phase Conjugation. The Klein-Gordon equation showed that we have in fact the proof that the solution to constructive compression, therefore, I said the solution to constructive interference is the solution to constructive compression, is the solution to implosion. And so this, again, is the top-down view of hydrogen and the smoking gun. This is what we're referring to repeatedly here, that Tom Bearden, who really inspired me years ago a lot, and indeed, in his book, Gravitobiology, he goes into great detail to show that the longitudinal interferometry is the physics of gravity waves and the physics of biology and growth. I remind you, I've reminded many times, but you put a copper plate on the roof, a wire into a copper plate in the basement, and pitch black basement, and everything grows fine. The plants all grow wonderful because the longitudinal wave from the sun is what caused the growth. It's the compressional wave that made it centripetal. So now you know why the flower shop across from the Therapy Center in Nashville is getting double the life of their flowers. It's fun. So we enjoyed teasing Einstein. Einstein is a hero, we're not criticizing, but we call this Einstein-induced insanity because he screwed up in a few critical areas. Not having a clue why objects fall to the ground, thinking the speed of light is a speed limit, it isn't. Thinking it takes infinite energy to go through the speed of light, wrong. Thinking all action at a distance is spooky, wrong. Not having a clue that the ether is made of a compressible superfluid whose compression and rarefaction is charge. Incorrectly and weirdly believing space-time is somehow bent, wrong. Not understanding both mass and time are created and defined simply by the inertia and period of charge rotation. And similarly, Tesla, who's a wonderful hero, and both these gentlemen are absolutely to be admired, and much of their work is way above my head, and I honor that. But there were some critical mistakes. And here are some of Tesla's mistakes. Choosing 60 hertz instead of 50 hertz. 50 hertz is the frequency most commonly mentioned in the healing literature for cancer, for example. And 50 hertz enables carbon to grow, 60 hertz prevents it. Sorry, America. So if you don't know what life is, you choose the wrong frequency, and Tesla screwed up. And the reason Tesla didn't get energy at a distance, because he didn't get the frequencies right, and he didn't get the longitudinal nodes correct. So if you want energy distribution without wires, you must know what longitudinal interferometry is. It is phase conjugation to Planck. So this is the picture of the magazine here, Nature magazine, saying the arrangement of masses in the universe is dodeca. Well, I just told you why. The New Scientist magazine says the universe is fractal. Well, it's the same thing. And this is the picture from our friend Hodowanek and Ramsey showing that you not only do you measure the wavefront of the gravity waves with a capacitor, because the capacitor is picking up the longitudinal component. Sorry, Weber, you don't need $1 million device to measure gravity waves. 25-cent capacitor will work fine if you know how to pick up a longitudinal wave. This is a bigger view of that same magazine. So in the vortex, for example, when Hitler paid Schauberger to make the vortex, which became Honibu, Vimana, that mercury vortex, the reason that is making gravity and making power from the vacuum is that is a piezoelectrically doped vortex that's generating acceleration of charge from compression of charge down the correct angle of the vortex. And the difference in voltage between here and here, as you see, let's see, between here and here, that is how this device is making power from gravity. So it was a piezoelectrically doped water vortex, and that became the Joe cell, the Honibu, And that's how the zero-point energy devices work in general. And the hint for the advanced people, rotating conjugators, if you can make this pure enough, the nanomaterials, sorry, Mr. Keshi, if you can make it pure enough, then a rotating conjugator makes every other source of energy and propulsion on this planet obsolete. So this is the Faraday disk principle we worked with for years. We're not going to go into all this. But notice there were 12 magnets in Coral Castle. And the reason the 12 magnets made gravity, charge implosion. And so we had...
Choosing compassion carefully aligns the magnetic field donuts around the heart so that nest dodeca icasa perfect embedding, self not self, squirting pineal pine cone through the speed of light into time intent creates the future, and revolving that spin path to 0 point in the blood, we get the Holy Grail, which has no inside or outside, solves the problem of separateness, contains self-embeds the Sufi heart within heart, feminine reproductive organs, into that 3D fractal you can zoom in forever and always see the same thing, heart within.
Mm-hmm. And if you rotate that, you see the swastika in there. We explained that the swastika was the key to the vril because that's the key to embedding longitudinal waves. And the Mandelbrot set and golden ratio, and this is if you take the one sine wave and nest it by golden ratio, you see the perfect flame. And this is the animation of one of the 6 pair of 60-degree vortex embedding an infinite nest of dodeca ecosa. I made this many years ago. Notice the perfect nest of infinite dodeca ecosa, which is here. And that's the Star Mother kit. So what we wanted to do was describe in a separate section here that if you take this physics of how charge implodes in a vortex, whether it is hydrogen or interstellar, if the implosion in that vortex is negentropic to center by acceleration through Planck, that makes it not just centripetal and negentropic, it is the origin of mindfulness. So we explain then that that implosion of that plasma vortex is how mindfulness occurs in the brain. Remember, the children seeing without their eyes literally are seeing a vortex tube form inside by golden ratio and brainwaves, flameinmind.com. And they say they're seeing through a little tube. So consciousness is the plasma vortex that formed inside the net of fireflies of the synapses, but it's not necessary for that plasma vortex to stay inside your head. You know, many medical surgeons have had out-of-body experiences. They see from outside their head. So we now know where the source of vision is. The source of vision is the vortex eyeball of the plasma tornado. That's what is the vision. And that's why you can take something through death and into a lucid dream. Understanding longitudinal interferometry is key to that. And that's also then how life forms in a seed. So, to be continued. Thank you.